grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid. They got a million toys at Toys R Us that I can play with. I don't wanna grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid. They got the best for so much less, you really flip your lid. From bikes to trains to video games, it's the biggest toy store there is.
Gee whiz!
I don't wanna grow up, 'cause baby, if I did, I couldn't be a Toys R Us kid. More games, more toys. Oh boy, I wanna be a Toys R Us kid.
Toys R Us. It's a name that is familiar to many people in my generation as well as previous generations. For a long time, they were the toy store. They weren't the only one, but they were the toy store, you know? The one everyone wanted to go to. Every kid was always excited to go into a Toys R Us. But in more recent times, they've fallen off and gone under. And now, you just don't see Toys R Us anymore. At least not to a significant extent. And though they are in the process of trying to come back, they're not anywhere close to what they once were. What happened to them? What could have possibly gone wrong here? Well, like all these corporate downfall stories, there was a few things. Some of which were very self-inflicted, but others weren't necessarily their fault. I know I say that a lot, but business tends to be complicated. But let's talk about it. The origins of Toys R Us date all the way back to 1948, to a man named Charles Lazarus. Lazarus didn't start out by selling toys, however. In the early stages of what would eventually lead to Toys R Us, he was actually selling baby furniture out of his father's bike shop in Washington, D.C. See, it was post-World War II, and Lazarus had served during the war. Naturally, he had plenty of friends he had spoken to while in the service, and according to him, every single one of them said all they wanted to do when this whole thing was over was to go home, get married, and have kids. This would wind up being true, as in retrospect we know that just after World War II was known as the baby boom, when everyone was indeed having kids. Just so many babies. Just so many babies. Listen, humanity had gotten through the worst global conflict we had ever seen. We were having kids. It's what we do, and it was a good time for that anyway, because during the 50s, the American economy was on point. People had money, people had homes, people who were getting cars, and they could afford to have pretty big families. Lazarus already wanted to start a business of his own, and to him it made sense because everyone wanted to have babies to sell stuff for babies. Over the following decade, his business grew, but he was a very adaptable individual and good at judging how certain things were selling and what people wanted. And one of the things he started including in his baby store were toys, because, well, babies like toys too, but he noticed the toys were actually selling really well. Plus, over time, all the babies were growing up. Humans are only technically babies for a year or two, and then they become toddlers and kids. And toddlers and kids don't need cribs and high chairs anymore. They need toys. His first store was known as Children's Bargain Town, but Lazarus envisioned something even bigger, what would basically be a big box outlet, but a specialized one for toys. In 1957, he got out of the baby furniture business entirely and renamed his company to Toys R Us. You know, like Toys R Us, like caveman speak. Toys R Us. Me ugh. Me make fire. Me play with Barbie. Ugh like Barbie. But, I mean, it had the word toys in it, and it was kind of a catchy name, so you know. And according to most sources, Toys R Us was, in fact, the first ever big box toy store. And at the time, not only was big box a new thing, but a big box toy store was an especially new thing. Because prior to that, pretty much every toy store was relatively small and family owned. And because of this, the line of products was limited. But Lazarus built gigantic establishments, because big box, and he could just shove so many toys in the store. Just an insane, stupid, outrageous amount of toys. And it was every kid's dream. The second any 8-year-old walked into a Toys R Us, they were in heaven because there were so many toys, so much fun to be had. A trip to Toys R Us became a real special treat for so many kids. And parents loved the chain too because, well, for one thing, it made their kids happy, and for two, because they were a big box establishment, they could often offer cheaper prices than the smaller toy store chains could, and the wider selection meant they would find toys that they didn't even realize existed and that their kids might want for like Christmas or birthdays or something. Some retail historians consider Toys R Us the very first ever category killer. A category killer, which is almost always a big box chain, that specializes in a given category and does it so well that they effectively drive all their major competition out of business. Now, such a thing wouldn't last for Toys R Us, as doubtless you're aware, but for a long time, Toys R Us was, again, the toy store. It was the place to be if you wanted toys. By 1965, Lazarus owned 5 different Toys R Us stores, and because they were a big box chain, they adapted big box strategies, such as loss leader pricing. I've talked about this tactic before, but I'll explain it again in case you haven't seen my other videos. Basically, Toys R Us was able to offer certain items at a price that was below their wholesale cost. This meant that whenever they sold them, they were taking a loss. And at face value, this doesn't seem to make sense. But because these were such good deals, it lured more shoppers into the store. And shoppers, when they go into a place like a big box store, wind up seeing a lot of different merchandise. And more often than not, while they would get the thing they came for, they'll often leave with some extra stuff too that the store was selling for profit. This tactic has been proven effective many times by many different big box stores. Toys R Us is just one example. Another thing that probably helped Toys R Us big time is that after World War II, the toy industry changed too, and went through a long and massive period of growth. So many different brands of toys were released during this time, it's pretty easy to lose count. But between the 50s and the late 90s, we're talking about things like Mr. Potato Head, Barbie, Easy Bake Oven, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and of course the ever-present Pokemon. I'm a 90s kid. Pokemon was my jam. Do you have any idea how much Pokemon stuff was in Toys R Us in the late 90s? It was awesome. I'm not gonna lie. Bow down to the mighty Pikachu. Actually, my favorite is Flareon. The mighty Pikachu! My point is that this was a great time to have a toy store, because there were so many toys kids wanted. Long lines of different toys available, and all of them could be found at your nearest Toys R Us. However, by 1966, Lazarus felt that he would need more resources, and by that I mean money, in order to really push his brand beyond what he was doing. They were growing, but it was slow. He decided to actually sell it to a company called Interstate Department Stores Incorporated, because he wanted to raise expansion capital. Interstate bought Toys R Us for $7.5 million, and they were able to take the company into the public sector. They allowed Lazarus to stay on as CEO because he was doing really well. He was good at the job, and he was making logical decisions. And it proved to be a very good investment for Interstate because, well, with all the money he suddenly had, Lazarus pushed for an aggressive expansion campaign that pushed Toys R Us to nationwide status throughout the 1970s. By 1978, they were the largest toy retailer in the entire United States, with a total of 182 stores. And those stores were, of course, working for them. They had $1 billion in sales in the late 70s. That was impressive. Naturally, the expansion continued, and they actually upped the pace. In 1983 alone, they opened 236 new locations, which is insane. And by the middle of that decade, Toys R Us constituted a quarter of all the toy sales in the US. By the beginning of the 90s, they were a worldwide brand, with over 1,300 stores in total. They would continue their dominance in the market for a few more years, but towards the end of the 90s, which I feel like I say a lot, the end of the 90s was really bad for certain retailers, things did start to change for them. See, they weren't the only kid on the block anymore. Yeah, they were great for toys and everyone loved them, and they had that awesome giraffe mascot named Jeffrey. Everyone loved Jeffrey. I like the era of Jeffrey where they literally CGI'd a realistic giraffe to represent him. I thought that was hysterical.
Jeffrey, are you sure about this?
Are you kidding? We're launching our biggest season ever with great low prices and more selection than anyone. And I want everyone to know about it.
I know, but your head's too close to the helium.
Check out this week's offers, like buy two, get the third free at all GameCube software. GameCube system now $99.99 and Hokey Pokey Elmo now $19.99. And get a free Barbie carry case with select Barbie purchase of $35 or more this week only at Toys R Us.
Hey, I can see my house from here.
But that sort of thing only gets you so far. The thing is, the more general merchandise big box outlets Walmart and Target started taking notice of the success of Toys R Us and realized how lucrative toys were. This was also about the time that both those brands were making their own stores bigger. So one of the changes they made was to expand their own toy selection. And you might be saying, well, Toys R Us still is going to have more toys though, right? And yeah, literally always. That was never not the case. The problem though was pricing. Walmart and Target made it a point to isolate which toys were actually selling and made sure to have those. And because they were a general merchandise big box outlet, they could do the whole loss leader pricing way more effectively than Toys R Us ever could, because they had way more stuff that they could sell at a profit and sell the toys at a loss, whereas Toys R Us only had their toys. And yeah, they could sell some of them at a loss, but not all of them, and especially not the popular ones, because those are the ones they knew people were gonna want, so they couldn't necessarily afford to always take hits on them. Economic changes also meant that people had a lot less spending power than they once did, and while the toy market is extremely profitable, it in particular is very vulnerable to economic recessions or, God help you, depressions, because toys, while I do think they're important to any developing child, they should have some entertainment, they are at the end of the day an option. You don't need toys, you need food, which Walmart and Target were selling. You need basic furniture, which Walmart and Target were selling. You need things like toiletries, toothpaste, clothes, which Walmart and Target were selling. Do you see the problem now? It also didn't help that Walmart and Target are both one-stop shops. You can go in there, get pretty much everything you could possibly need, and not go to any other store. I've explained before that shopping is not just a monetary investment. It's also a time investment. In the modern day, a lot of people don't want to spend all day shopping. They don't want to go to multiple different places. They want to go to just one. And when Walmart and Target have enough toys, as well as a whole bunch of other stuff that you actually need for your home, why would you ever stop at Toys R Us? There was no reason to anymore. Walmart and Target's supply chain management was also top tier, and Toys R Us's supply chain was never as good as especially Walmart's, which also helped the other chains undercut their price. And of course, online shopping was coming into the fold, which was another threat that came at a lot of different retailers. This put Toys R Us in a really awkward position. While the existence of Pokemon did give them a small boon in the late 90s, it dropped from there. By 97, they only had 18% of the overall toy sales, and their profit margin would fall from 12% in 1990 to 8% in 1997. In 1998, they filed their first bankruptcy, Chapter 11, Bankruptcy Protection. This, while bad, wasn't the end of them, as I'm sure plenty of you know. They did come back from this, and it was probably a good call. The filing let them restructure their internal debt while also continuing their normal business operations. It was one of those quiet bankruptcies too. Not a lot of people even really talked about it because Toys R Us was not going anywhere and no one ever thought they were. At least at that time. And they actually emerged from the bankruptcy pretty alright. They reoriented themselves well, the restructuring was successful, but in the early 2000s things started changing again. Walmart and Target were even bigger, but the online thing was a major thorn in Toys R Us's side. Online retailers don't have to pay for a lot of overhead, and thus could also undercut Toys R Us's prices. And shopping that way was becoming more popular because people were like, well, I don't even have to go outside to buy my kid a toy now. Even Walmart and Target were threatened, which is why they started their own online storefronts. But Toys R Us was very, very, very late to this party. And the thing was, they'd also started losing their luster over the years. Toys R Us was once this magical, heavenly place for children, but a lot of them were very dated. They got very Kmart in this regard. The stores desperately needed updating. While they still had a lot of toys, you could tell that they were old and in need of refurbishment. But they didn't have the money to do that all at once. They attempted to branch out a few times with chains like Kids R Us and Babies R Us. Babies R Us was actually basically Lazarus's original business idea, which was baby stuff. And Kids R Us was actually for clothing. But these separate chains had mixed success. Kids R Us only stayed standalone until 2003, then they combined it with the Toys R Us, and then they stopped that brand entirely in 2007. Babies R Us did a little bit better, but still wound up being co-branded alongside Toys R Us in 2011. They did start remodeling things, but it was slow going. And they might have been able to reorient themselves after a while until one little itsy-bitsy problem occurred. Mind you, Lazarus was not actually involved by the early 2000s. He had stepped down as the company's CEO in 1994. In the year 2000, the CEO was named John Eiler. Eiler was pushing to remodel and relaunch the chain, and though they started, on March 17, 2005, Toys R Us was bought out. A consortium of Bain Capital Partners LLC, Kohlberg Kravitz Roberts, and Vornado Reality Trust announced a $6.6 billion leveraged buyout of the company. This made Toys R Us a privately owned company again, and as a result, the public stock options closed for the last time on July 21st, 2005, sitting at $26.75 a share. Now, why was this necessarily bad? Private buyouts can sometimes help a company, and yes, sometimes, but this wasn't any old buyout. Remember, this was a leveraged buyout. And a leveraged buyout is not the same. A leveraged buyout is different than a regular buyout. A leveraged buyout, or LBO, is a buyout, one company's acquisition of another company, but the buyout is utilizing a significant amount of borrowed money, or leverage, to actually meet the cost of that acquisition. And the assets of the company being acquired are often used as collateral for those loans. Basically, the leveraged buyout resulted in Toys R Us, which, mind you, by that point was doing fine, but not necessarily great, and already had their own debts, suddenly had billions of dollars in debt to pay back. Over $5 billion to be precise. And that meant they had to pay $400 million per year in just interest payments. I repeat, $400 million per year in just the interest. Now, this wasn't all bad. It did give management more flexibility to try to turn operations around, but they proceeded not to do that. They didn't update the stores quick enough. They still dragged their feet on the whole online thing, though they did start somewhat investing in that. But the biggest problem, and probably stupidest decision they made, is that they decided to adopt Walmart and Target tactics and actually start limiting their toy selections to only the most popular thing. This was an outrageously stupid thing for them to do. The reason for this is that they gave up their one advantage. The only thing that Toys R Us had over both Target and Walmart was the selection. Like, yeah, a lot of those alternate toys didn't sell as quickly as the really mega popular stuff, but you could often sell those toys for a lot less as impulse buys for people looking for something new, something different. The thing about Toys R Us, more than anything, was that when people walked in, they would wind up seeing something, a toy, that they didn't even know existed before. It's not something any other store could easily replicate, and it was a big part of Toys R Us's magic as well as their sales. But they got rid of it and focused only on the stuff that everyone else had. But the second they did that, why would you ever go to Toys R Us at that point? You're both more expensive and you have the exact same thing as Walmart and Target do, even though those two shouldn't be able to have as much selection, because you have literally more space dedicated to toys. It's all you have! Well, that and the clothing lines and stuff, but you get my point. Limiting their selection was basically suicide. It was the exact opposite of what they should have done. They should have leaned into that advantage, updated their storefronts, and focused more on online. And if they had done that, they probably wouldn't have gone into bankruptcy a second time, even with that outrageous debt. And yet, they didn't do that. From 2006 to 2013, Toys R Us only had a single profitable year. Every other one, they were in the red. And by 2017, they were on a steep downslope. That year is the year they announced their plans to close 180 of their stores in an effort to try to stabilize themselves. But by that point, there was nothing they could really do to avoid the inevitable. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protections again on September 18th, 2017, believing that this would help them deal with that, $5 billion in debt that I mentioned before. The bankruptcy protection did allow them to borrow $2 billion more, which, great, but they were going to use that money to properly prepare for the upcoming holiday season, which, to be fair, on paper made sense. The holidays are big, especially for toys. It's Christmas time! Toys under the Christmas tree! It is the exact time period when a company like Toys R Us should expect to make a ton of money. 2017 Toys R Us sales were absolutely pitiful. Just disgusting. They weren't necessarily in the red for that quarter, but they were barely in the black. It was horrifying, and technically overall they were in the red because they definitely did not make that $2 billion they borrowed back. They hadn't had an annual profit at all since 2013, and with seemingly no way out, it put their workforce of 64,000 individuals who actually kind of liked their jobs because Toys R Us was mostly considered a pretty fun place to work, but it put them at risk of losing those jobs. Initially, they claimed that only the US and Canadian operations would be affected by this, but in January of 2018 they realized there was just no way out. The holiday season had made it clear that they were done. As such, they would proceed to start the liquidation process, closing up to 182 stores in the US, and try to convert up to 12 stores into the co-branded Toys R Us and Babies R Us lines, as those generally did better since it at least combined different products. By the end of February, they were looking into possibly trying to retain their stronger Canadian operations, the ones that were actually doing well, as well as divest a lot of the still corporate-owned stores into franchises, though later they were announced that every single location in the United States would be closed down. On March 15th, 2018, Toys R Us received approval from the bankruptcy court to liquidate its stores. The liquidation sales began on March 23, 2018. Their online store shut down on March 29th, and on April 24th, it was announced that the Canadian division would be sold to Fairfax Financial for $234 million, who would continue to operate those locations under the brand name. On June 29, 2018, Toys R Us permanently closed all of its remaining US locations after operating for 70 years. And in one bright spot of the story, in early July of 2018, it was reported that two anonymous benefactors had actually purchased all the remaining stock of two of the stores in North Carolina so that those toys could be donated to charity, which is actually quite sweet. The thing about the death of Toys R Us is that people were genuinely upset by this. See, in my videos about companies like Blockbuster, Kmart, Circuit City, a lot of people laugh at them. Especially towards the end of their lives, they were practically a joke, and people didn't even like working for them, or shopping there for that matter. But Toys R Us was different. Not only did a lot of the employees enjoy their jobs because they got to work around toys and sell stuff to kids who were genuinely happy about just being in the store, but for the customer, it was a place of nostalgia. I'm sure there's plenty of people watching this from the boomer generation, Generation X, as well as my millennial generation, can speak to this element. Because when I was a kid, Toys R Us was a pretty big deal. Going there was a special treat. Because mind you, my family, we weren't exactly poor, but we weren't well off either. Lower middle class. My parents didn't have a lot of money. We got by, but we didn't have a lot of extra spending power. To be honest, my parents probably spent more on me and my sisters than they genuinely should have, but regardless, Toys R Us was a special thing, and with the death of it, it meant that no other kids would ever get to experience that. Walking in, seeing all these toys, all these things that you didn't even know existed, and realizing that your parent was actually willing to buy you one. It was a happy occasion, and it was just gone. As such, people were genuinely depressed about the death of Toys R Us. Because let's be fair, whether or not Walmart and Target are cheaper in the toy department, do you really walk into those stores, particularly Walmart, with a big smile on your face? Because with Toys R Us, that's what happened. As a kid, we were genuinely happy to be there. That never happens with Walmart. You're never happy to be at Walmart. Who the heck is happy to walk into Walmart? You go there because you have to. Does anyone really want to go here? Honestly.
Bring it! Bring it! Bring it!
Which one?
Bring it!
Leo.
Bring it!
Just go! That's an adult?
You're making it work!
Let's just walk up
I'm
to
just
them.
talking.
Walk up to them. Walk with Chris. Walk with Chris. Touch Chris.
Let's be real about this. But I do have some good news. For one thing, the brand is not dead worldwide. They are still doing okay, particularly over in Asian countries. And they did manage to stay alive up in Canada. But as for here in America, well, they have been going through a bit of a revival period. Yeah, Toys R Us is trying to come back. And so far, it's going okay, I would say. Not amazing. They probably will never be as dominant as they once were. but they will probably be able to keep existing as long as they play their cards right. The company actually issued a bankruptcy court filing which stated that it would no longer auction off its intellectual property, and this was because the controlling lender wanted to revive the business, utilizing both the Toys R Us and Babies R Us brand names. They were planning on focusing on trying to maintain the existing licensing agreements that they already had, and establish newer opportunities in the future. They felt that selling off the brand wouldn't actually result in a good outcome, so it was kept. And at the Toy Industry Association's Fall Toy Preview, they unveiled plans for a preliminary venture into a revival, which they called Jeffrey's Toy Box. This particular outing was a wholesale store within a store. Ugh, God, I hate them! But wholesale store within a store concept that they planned to deploy in time for the holiday shopping season. If that went well, they wanted to revive the Toys R Us and Babies R Us brands sometime in the future. In November 2018, it was made public that the grocery market chain, Kroger, was going to add toy displays under the Jeffrey's Toy Box brand at select locations. And the whole Jeffrey's Toy Box thing kinda did alright for them. It wasn't like an amazing success, but it was a good idea that attracted interest, because remember, like I said, people were upset that Toys R Us had gone under, unlike a lot of the other companies. So when it was announced that they were reviving it, people were like, I gotta help, I gotta buy something, I gotta buy something. They saw it in the Kroger, they were like, oh, I'm buying something, I don't even care what it is. I'm sure the missus will be perfectly fine that I spent all this money on a brand new Unicron. On January 20th, 2019, they did in fact emerge from bankruptcy with a new name, known as True Kids. And on June 21st, they explained their plans to open new stores in the US, which they wanted to be about 10,000 square feet. This would be a smaller store setup, but it meant that they could shoot for a more creative, modern appearance that might work better, and also be more cost-effective because the buildings weren't as big. On November 27th, they followed through, opening a retail store at Westfield Garden State Plaza in Paramus, New Jersey. On December 7th, a second location opened at the Galleria in Houston, Texas. And on October 8th, they relaunched the Toys R Us website because, of course, this is the modern retail arena. They knew they had to get into the online market. Though they handled it in a bit of a unique way. See, the Toys R Us site featured a focus on resources and videos that highlighted popular toys, and it was established in a partnership with Target. Interesting. Former enemies are now friends, huh? Okay. The result was that users were redirected to Target.com to actually place orders for toys. But that agreement would lapse in 2020, and Amazon wound up replacing Target in the fulfillment partner role. Not sure how much I agree with using a competitor in this manner, because you'd make more money if you were doing it yourself, but maybe they just don't have the capital for it. And if that's the case, this might be the best route in order to at least stay relevant and get the brand out there. I mean, store within a store, I guess, was already kind of a partnership, but at least there it was with Kroger, and Kroger's a grocery store. They were never a competitor to Toys R Us. But anyway, that's just me thinking out loud again. However, we're now at 2020, when things got kind of awkward for every retailer because of COVID-19. The pandemic threw a monkey wrench into the revival plans quite a bit. The two standalone stores they had managed to open had to close again because of financial losses they had sustained throughout the whole quarantine period. People could barely go get groceries. They were not going to a toy store. That didn't happen. But fortunately, they didn't actually wait till the last minute on this. See, according to them, this was strategic, because they realized there was no way they were going to keep those stores afloat. So they closed them down while they still could, in order to save money in the long run and alter their entire strategy. This way they could invest that capital into newer stores that would offer them better traffic, as well as be thrown out with better timing, not being crippled by an unforeseen pandemic. On March 15th, 2021, the brand management company, WHP Global, acquired a controlling interest in True Kids. And that meant WHP would be managing the business, helping and guiding the expansion forward. Though, by acquiring an interest, they did inject money into True Kids, and they would help use that money to formulate plans and open new Toys R Us stores a second time. And remember, this is March. They really wanted to do this before the 2021 holiday season, because they were not dumb. Holiday season, Christmas presents, toys. They wanted to at least get 1 or 2 stores open before Christmas hit. And they had a bunch of different format ideas, including flagship stores, smaller pop-ups, locations at airports, which is interesting, as well as the store within a store idea. By August, they had a new deal with Macy's to sell toys on their website, as well as open store within a store locations at 400 different Macy's department stores. An interesting choice since Macy's has been kind of on a decline since they are a department store, but they are doing a lot better than you'd think. And on December 16th, right before Christmas, they opened a 2-story flagship store, which was 20,000 square feet in the American Dream Meadowlands Mall in East Rutherford, New Jersey. And by August 7th of 2022, they'd opened new locations in 9 different states: California, Georgia, New Jersey, Illinois, Nevada, Louisiana, New York, Maryland, and Missouri. Those locations are all the store within a store Macy's arrangement, and vary in size from just 1,000 to 10,000 square feet. They also opened a second flagship store inside the Mall of America in Bloomington, Minnesota in November of 2023. And WHP is pushing to just put Toys R Us in every single corner they could possibly think of. On September 29th, 2023, they announced their intention to open 24 new physical locations. So far, at least as of the making of this video, it seems like Toys R Us is coming back. Slowly but surely, they are building up another presence. Again, I don't think they'll ever be as big as they once were, but perhaps, if things continue to go right, there might be a chance that future generations will still have that Toys R Us experience. They'll still be able to walk into a building that's full of nothing but their favorite things. Walk around, test out new stuff, and just have a good time. Because let's be realistic, it's pretty difficult to recreate the magic of being a Toys R Us kid. And with that, a special thank you goes out to all my underwater train finders: Some Dude 267, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Jack Carson's Road Videos, Lord Off 444, Isurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redlion, NS Productions 8104, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Josh Johnson, Caleb Brainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Delinsky, JBL Explorers, Tommy Rossini, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mark Holding, G Wiz, Mr. Revel, Hayden DeGrow, No, Kurt Forkham, Ohio Trucker 1, Mr. Sleepy, Harry, Drew Debris, George Kenny, Kevin Wood, Liam Wright, Morris Tillman Productions, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Hannah Bird, Duraushi, Your Mom Liked It, Windy City Rails, A Person 723, William Nemo, Dr. Racer 78, Shimasu, Murder Drones Doll, Eric Hutton, AET Museum, NJ 1969, Metal for Life Guy, Andrew Bowen, Crimson Rose, Ryan Wehofer, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fun farewell.